Well, we're continuing with our sermon series on Advent. Today we're talking about joy, and today has been a perfect day for talking about joy. Absolutely perfect. And I know that sounds like I'm not being serious at this point, but it really is. It fits. I couldn't, if I had ordered up a Sunday morning from God to fit in with my sermon today, I couldn't have done a better job than what He provided for us. And so we're going to look at joy today, and we're going to look at the idea of living in joy, and we're going to ask ourselves a few questions. We're going to first ask, what is the nature of joy? Because I think that there's sometimes a misunderstanding on really what joy is. How do I get joy? Because obviously knowing what it is but not knowing how to get it's no good. And then 3, how do I complete joy? Because I think a lot of times we're missing out on some of the stuff that God has for us. Our joy is there, but maybe it's not complete. And so let's look at how to complete that. And let's start today in Philippians 4, chapter 4, verse 4. And we're going to look at kind of the middle of a thought that Paul has here, and we'll try to figure out how it fits into the whole thought that he has. But just for now, let's read verse 4 and verse 5 of Philippians chapter 4. It says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice." And then we're actually just going to read the first part of part 5, or verse 5. It says, "Let your reasonableness be known to everyone." Now, it's interesting that when I first, in reading, I've heard this verse, I don't know how many times in my life, and it never occurred to me what Paul was doing there with putting the second part with the first part, because we're at that part of Philippians where there's kind of, Paul always, in his letters at some point, there's a laundry list, usually towards the end, there's a laundry list of things, and in my mind always, that's kind of where we were at in chapter 4, verse 4, is that Paul's going on with a laundry list of things. But honestly, I've come to reevaluate that, and it's very interesting to me that Paul says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice." And then he says, "Let your reasonableness be known to everyone." The reason I find that strange is because it seems to be a contradiction. Paul says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice." If you follow that commandment, if you follow that advice, if you follow Paul's word here to rejoice in the Lord always, it doesn't make sense to me how "let your reasonableness be known to everyone" follows from that. Do you guys know what I'm saying? How many of you guys know weirdos? Anyone know weirdos? Raise your hand if you know somebody who's a weirdo. Right? If you're not raising your hand, it might be you. So the thing is that we all know weirdos, right? And it seems like, in my mind, I guess for a long time, this is kind of what I could see about Paul's command here is, be a weirdo, let your reasonableness be known to everyone. It seems like a contradiction, right? Because I've known people that seem to be really, really joyful. And the thing is, there's times when joy seems reasonable. But the problem is that people I know that are always joyful, they exceed that reasonableness. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? You go into work and there's that person that's always happy, and you're like, "Oh, come on. Give it a break already." Do you guys know what I'm talking about? I can't be the only one. Now, I know that I am descended from a long, proud line of Eeyores. I know that. And so I know that I might be off the mark here, but that's what it seems to me. And it seems like Paul's saying, be one of those really weird Jesus weirdos. And then he's saying, let your reasonableness be known to everyone. Now, the thing is that I was looking at that this week and I was thinking, that's really odd. And then I started thinking, well, maybe Paul's onto something here. Maybe Paul knows what he's talking about. Let's just assume that. Let's assume that Paul knows what he's talking about. So if we assume that Paul knows what he's talking about, how do we read this? Well, it's interesting that Paul is actually giving this advice after talking about two people in the church there in Philippi that are having a disagreement. In fact, it must be some kind of big disagreement for Paul to write in his letter, "Hey, try to get these two people to agree." And he talks about how both of them were helpful to him in his ministry. And he says, ask them to agree in the Lord. And in fact, I think what Paul's saying here is that there's a reasonableness of life that comes from living in the joy of the Lord. In fact, living in the joy of the Lord always. Now, it's important to say from the beginning, there's an unreasonable kind of happiness or joy. Let's just make that clear, and I'm not talking about that. I'm not saying we should be like that. But I think there's also a reasonable kind of joy that can actually be present in your life all the time. So let's ask, what is the nature of joy? Let's first get that taken care of. What's the nature of joy? Well, it's important for us to understand that the world is in pursuit of happiness. And in fact, it's written into our Constitution, right? Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution. We were formed, right, to pursue happiness amongst other things. It's clear that this is an important thing in the world and that the world is busily pursuing happiness. And in spite of that, the Bible really doesn't talk about happiness as much as it talks about joy. And I know that you're expecting me to contrast happiness and joy, that they're two different things, because this is a sermon on joy and you have to do that. I will not disappoint you today. We're going to talk about the difference between happiness and joy. Now, it's interesting that if you look at words, we're going to nerd out here are you guys cool with us nerding out for a little while? Because we are going to totally nerd out here. We're going to talk about words and their roots. Happiness, our word for happiness in English, comes from an Old Norse word. Back when we were Vikings and stuff like that, heppen is the word that it comes from. And heppen is an interesting word. It means to kind of fit into occur, to befall, to happen. That's where we get our word happen from. But the interesting thing is that there's a lot of words that are descendants from this Old Norse word heppen. There's a family of words that descends from this word, okay? And let me go over some of those words. There's hap. There's a word called hap, and it's something that's unexpected, something that's random or to chance. And there's happen, to befall you, something that happens to you, something that occurs. And then there's mishap, and it's something that's accidental, an unlucky accident, right? You guys know what I'm talking about. You have a mishap. And then there's also happy. And happy means fortunate and convenient, feeling or showing pleasure or contentment. You know, this feeling or showing pleasure or contentment, it's based on fortunate and convenient happenings. We get the word happen from happening, from happen. Happy is about good, fortunate, convenient happenings to you. And it's important to understand that from the Old Norse word, these were things that were random, that happened by chance. Basically, when we pursue happiness, we're pursuing fortunate occurrences that happen by chance. Now, think about that for a moment. Think about what it means to try to pursue random events that are convenient or fortunate for you. We know what the word random means, right? When you're pursuing random events, you're basically what we're doing is we're rolling up to the happiness casino and we're rolling the dice and we're hoping that we get that our lucky numbers come up. That's what it means to experience happiness. That's what the word comes from and the way, honestly, that we use it. If we're happy, it's usually because fortunate circumstances are happening to us at the moment. So this morning, we come in, and Josh has spent all kinds of time yesterday. We had some video issues that have been plaguing us for a while, and you probably have noticed them. What's happened is we have a computer that runs our front projection here. It runs our back projection also, but it runs that, but we need it to hook into the soundboard because when we play a video, we want you to hear it. Well, what happened was in our old computer, the sound card went out, and so we plugged it into the onboard sound, and you guys have noticed, hopefully, well, not maybe not hopefully. Maybe it's hopeful that you didn't notice it. But anyway, the point is, what happened was when you would play a video, there would be this loud kind of buzzing noise in the background. It was really unpleasant. And so Josh was like, I'm going to fix that. I've had enough of this. Puts in a new computer. Things seem to be running fine until this morning, when what happens is that anytime we would turn on any stage lights at all, the signal would go out. It would just stop showing stuff on the screen. As long as everything was dark here, it would show stuff on the screen. Now, it would occasionally kind of blink, but it would show things on the screen. But the minute you turned on any lights on the stage, it would stop showing anything. In fact, the computer would say, I'm not getting, or the projector would say, I'm not getting a signal at all. And we knew that was a lie. So this is what's going on. Now, these are not fortunate or convenient happenings. And you know in your life that this is kind of how things go. Like sometimes every once in a while you get lucky. I have another motorcycle. I told you guys about like the 3-day motorcycle oil change. I have another motorcycle, just got it. And I thought to myself, I need to change the oil. And I was thinking this is probably going to be another 3-day thing. And I go out there and I check the oil and it's perfect level and it's clean as it can be. Done. Right? It was fantastic. It was fantastic. I went out there and in less than 30 seconds, I accomplished my task. Everything was great. Those are the times when you're happy, right? But when you walk in and everything's going wrong, and in your life, this is true, right? Everything's going great, you're happy, everything's going wrong, you're not happy. Now, contrast that with what the Bible says about joy. And this comes from a Greek word, kara. It means joy or delight or the source of joy. Now, we could be just talking about happiness, but hold on. This word joy, kara, is also part of a family of words. Karo, to rejoice or delight in. Charis, which is where we get the word grace. And kar, which means extended favor, the awareness of God's grace. You see, there's actually a big difference between joy and between happiness. Happiness has to do with random events either aligning with you or not. They're either happy or they're a mishap. The events in your life will kind of line up that way. They'll either be happy events or they'll be mishaps. But when you get to joy, there's something different going on. Joy is really grace recognized. Can I say that again? Joy is grace recognized. When you live with joy, what you're doing is you're recognizing the grace as the foundation, the grace that God has shown you as the foundation of everything in your life. The foundation of all the events of your life, the foundation of how you live. It's not random. The events of your life are not random. They are, in fact, rooted in the grace of God that He has extended to you. And joy is merely recognizing that. It's having your eyes open to see life in a different way. That everything that's going on in your life, it's not random. It's actually rooted in something much more compelling. It's rooted in God's desire to bless you. God's desire to bless you more than you deserve to be blessed. In fact, God's desire to bless you when you deserve the opposite of blessing. Joy is grace recognized. Think about it this way. I don't watch TV or that kind of stuff. I watch TV, but I watch it on the internet. I don't watch it. The point is, I don't know what's going on in the world, okay? I don't know what's going on in the world. There's still a lottery, right? Is there still a lottery? Still go on? Okay. I had to make sure because I don't know. And sometimes it gets big. Does that still happen? Because seriously, if you told me, when's the last time the lottery got big? I have no idea. It still happens though, right? People still go out there, they still buy tickets, still gets up to like 100 million or something like that. I'm completely cut off from reality now. I'm letting you know that. I'm assuming that this is still happening. I'm not getting a lot of yeses. Maybe you guys are cut off from reality too. Maybe they stopped doing it because of COVID. I don't know. But the point is, let's go back in time at least to the point where there was a lottery and you could win $100 million. Think about that. Think about watching the drawing happen, because they did that on TV at some point. And you're watching the drawing happen, and you got your card there, and one by one, the numbers come up, and they match yours until you're so excited you can barely contain yourself. You almost can't watch the TV, and you watch, and that last number comes up, and you've won. And it's $100 million, and you've won. And then after that, sometimes they were in the middle of a news program or part of a news program or something. After that, the news comes on, and your favorite team lost that day. And you stomp around the house. You say, I can't believe my team lost today. And you're in a bad mood, and you kick the dog, and you yell at the wife, and you yell at the kids, and finally you go out into the garage because you're mad, and you throw down a wrench, and it hits you in the toe, and you're like, wah! And then when you're doing that, you spill your coffee on your favorite shirt, and you're like, my favorite shirt! Is that a likely scenario? Is that a likely? No, it's not a likely scenario at all, right? If you just won the lottery, you'd probably not really care that much that your team lost. You'd probably say, no, it happens. Tough for them. Let's go party, right? Let's go celebrate. You know what I'm saying? Like your life would be transformed, at least for a while. You would be so overjoyed that things that maybe bothered you wouldn't bother you anymore. You would just say, oh, that's the way that is. Let's move on. That's not that big of a deal. I've got bigger things to think about. I've got all the blessings that are coming with this money. There's some responsibilities too, but I'm thinking right now about the blessings, and let's live life in light of those blessings. Here's the problem that we experience in life. It's reasonable to not care if your team lost when you've just won the lottery. It's reasonable not to care too much that you spilled coffee on your favorite shirt when your team won. It's reasonable not to care even that much whether you just stubbed your toe when your team, or when you just won the lottery. When you've just won the lottery, these things, getting upset about these things, is no longer reasonable. I think that's what Paul's talking about here. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. In light of what God has done for you, in light of the grace that you've received, in light of the fact that Jesus gave up his life so that you can be reunited with the Father, and that you have an inheritance in him that is far beyond anything that anyone can count or measure, that you will be exploring the riches of his grace for all eternity. In light of that, be reasonable. Somebody doesn't see eye to eye with you? Okay, be reasonable. You're not getting everything you want out of every little aspect of your life? Okay, be reasonable. Some problems, some storms come into your life? That's going to happen. Be reasonable. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. Now, that doesn't mean that what Paul's talking about here is just emotionalism and dialing the emotion up to 11 on everything. That's not what Paul's talking about here. Paul's not talking about, he's not advocating going nuts over everything that happens in your life. He's not advocating, here's the thing, that if your joy is based on God's grace to you, then what's interesting is you become the opposite of that person that's always going overboard about everything, right? You know what I'm talking about? Like, that person that, oh, potluck today at the office. Oh, that's the person that you come in. If you're this person, I'm really sorry. But the person you come into the office and just every little thing they're just like over the top about. The thing is, in light of God's grace for me, I'm glad it's potluck day today at the office. But I've got bigger, better things going on in my life. Let's be honest. I'm going to be exploring the riches of God's grace for eternity. I mean, this pot looks neat. I hope there's some deviled eggs. I hope I'm close enough to the front of the line to get one before they're out. But, even if I don't, it's not that big a deal. You know what I'm saying? Like you become the opposite of that person that's gone way over to emotionalism. You become that person who just has an air of joy about them, but doesn't go up and down with everything that happens in their life. I think sometimes the problem as Christians is we read verses like this and we think, I need to be joyful all the time. And so we kind of put on this, or maybe we practice and it becomes part of us, this total emotionalism about everything. And people look at us and go, that person's a little odd. Now, there's a good kind of odd and a bad kind of odd. That's not the good kind. I think that what Paul's saying here is something important for us to understand. That the nature of joy, living in light of the grace of God, recognizing that grace and having that be part of our everyday existence, is something that makes us more attractive to be around, more reasonable, more pleasant, not less. The difference of opinion that begins this chapter, is it reasonable to make a big deal out of this in light of God's grace? Paul's saying, no, it's not. It's interesting that when you look at Jesus, you don't get the idea of somebody who was just like crazy emotional about everything. Now, there are times when certain emotions of his surprises us, but it's not like the nature of his existence. In fact, he seems incredibly reasonable. Even this, I was thinking about this, in John chapter 19, verse 26 and 27, Jesus is talking about, or Jesus is on the cross. He's in the midst of being crucified. And you think, if there's a time to be emotional, if there's a time, we could see Jesus being kind of crazy, like, this is great, and thinking, that's a little odd. Or he could be like so down and so depressed. But, the interesting thing is how reasonable Jesus seems even on the cross. In John 19:26 says, when Jesus saw his mother and the disciples whom he loved, or the disciple whom he loved, standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her to his own home. It's amazing how in the midst of dying for the sins of the entire world and approaching being separated from the Father in a way that no one has ever experienced, that Jesus is so completely reasonable to see his mother and thinking, somebody needs to take care of her. The disciple that I was closest with, he's here. I'm going to make arrangements for her. Like, what could be more reasonable than that? In fact, all through Jesus' life, that's what you see. You see somebody who's just reasonable. There's a joy that makes us more reasonable rather than less. I was thinking about the way things are going right now in our world, and so there's some crazy stuff going on. Like, you see those videos of those crowds of people going in and breaking into stores. I was watching a news article on the internet, and I was watching how this guy, I guess, was hired by a news crew. They were covering some of that to protect their gear, and a bunch of people came up to steal their gear, and he tried to stop them, and he was shot and killed. And I think to myself, is that reasonable? Is it reasonable to want something so badly that you're willing to kill somebody over it? Something that you didn't earn or work for? In light of what God has done for us, that is completely unreasonable. In fact, what's interesting is when you really understand joy, the kind of joy that is foundational throughout Scripture, it is a joy that cannot be taken away from you by circumstances, and it's a joy that makes you the most reasonable person in the world, not the least. So how do I get this joy? Let's look at number 2. How do I get this joy? Well, James chapter 1, verse 2 through 4 is an interesting one. We've covered it here many times, and it's interesting because it's so terrible. James 1, 2 through 4 says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds." Now, nobody wants to hear that, right? Nobody. When you're in the midst of a trial, when you're when you're, in the middle of a 4-day, oil change, or your dog has just chewed up your couch, is what you want is your spouse will come along and say, "Count it all joy." Is it just me? Maybe I can't, the glasses that I have on today are the wrong ones because I couldn't find the right ones. Another thing that was going wrong today. They're my computer glasses, so I can see my words just fine, but all of you are blurry. So let me take them off for a second. Is it just me? Am I the only one that gets upset about life? Can you please raise your hand if you get upset about these things? Okay, good, because I was feeling a little lonely there for a second. Now, here's the thing. This is a verse that's really hard. It's one of those that we hate to hear because it's so difficult for us. "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." Now, so really what's fascinating to me here is James is saying, here's how you get joy. You face trials of many kinds. This is how you get joy. Now, it seems counterintuitive to us that this is how you get joy. But remember, joy and happiness are different. The problem is that we have a short time perspective. Now, here's the problem. If you win $100 million, you're going to celebrate for a while. But there's a point at which your natural tendencies are going to take back over. And the problems associated with that are going to start to pile up, right? And you're going to start viewing those the way that you view things normally. Like, it's not like just winning $100 million comes without any hassles or headaches. And if you normally are prone to seeing those mishaps as problems in your life, then you're going to start seeing this $100 million the same way. That's the way that we work as people. In contrast to that, what the Bible is trying to tell us is that we have to learn to live every day of our lives and every moment of our lives in recognition of God's grace. You have to really learn to live like every single moment in recognition of God's grace. Now, I was thinking about this and it seemed completely reasonable to me. Think about this for a second. How is heaven going to be heaven if you haven't learned to live every moment of your life in relationship and reason of God's grace, by God's grace? Like, in relationship to God's grace, that changes everything. And imagine going to heaven. It's not like, I don't think heaven can really be all that fun and joyful if real things aren't going on. If you take the cartoon version of heaven and somebody's strumming a harp on a cloud and that's all you do all day, I mean, fine. You don't have to live your life in view of God's grace if that's all that's happening. But even then, maybe you do, right? Can you imagine that two people start arguing over who's going to sit on this cloud today? Right? You got it yesterday. Well, that's because it's my cloud. You're just proving my point. That's my cloud. No, you got to sit on it yesterday. That's the best cloud, and I want to sit on it today. You already had your turn. Does that sound like heaven to you? No, it sounds like taking your family on vacation, doesn't it? That was a joke. So the thing is that, you see what I'm saying? And you have to think about heaven being heaven. Everybody there has to learn to live their lives in light of God's grace all the time and every moment. Because I think there's going to be real things going on, really important things going on. In fact, I think there's going to be more real and more important things going on there for eternity than we've ever experienced here in our lives. I think that's going to be more real. There's going to be more responsibility. There's going to be more reality. There's going to be more importance to every moment that we're living up there. We couldn't even bear the burden of it, I think, now. And that's what's going to be going on all the time. And unless you live in light of God's grace all the time, then you won't make it heaven. So how do we learn to do that? Well, you face trials. You face trial. You have to. There's no other way. I was thinking about this. I used to watch this TV show on TV, and it was about helicopters. The Coast Guards would go out on these helicopters, and they would fly in the middle of these storms. And I thought about what would it be like, if you were. This is a brand new helicopter out, and the government's giving it to you and saying, "Here, this is the next time you go out into a storm, you got to fly this new helicopter." Well, you would kind of hope that helicopter had faced some trials of many kinds, right? You'd kind of hope that. You'd kind of hope that they said, think about the pilot, the test pilot, going out to fly it for the first time. What is he going to do? Is he going to go out into the middle of the storm? No. He's just going to see, can it fly, right? That's all he cares about. Is it going to kill anybody if it's just flying? Can I get it up in the air and not have it take my life? That's all he cares about. That's the first flight. Can I get it up there? And so he does. He gets it up there and he says, whew, man, it's good that happened, right? But then eventually, they're going to keep testing it and they're going to put it through every single kind of trial. And you have to do that because eventually somebody's got to take it out in the worst possible hurricane, trying to fly it over a boat where that's sinking, that people's lives are dependent on it. And that pilot needs to know, is this helicopter going to get us all home or is it going to crash and kill us all? He needs to have faith in that. It has to be strong. And so they have to keep testing it. And eventually that pilot knows that this is something that can be relied on. Pretty soon he doesn't even think about it. He's just going out every day, no matter what the weather, right? Because he trusts in that thing. Why? Because it's been put to the test. We adopt the worldviews that we have because we think that it'll get us through life and the storms of life. I told you before, I've come from a long line of Eeyores. They're a very proud line of Eeyores, and they are that way because they think that it's going to get them through life, and especially they think it's going to get them through the storm. Well, if you don't get your hopes up, you won't have them dashed, and then this isn't that big of a deal because we didn't expect any better. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Some people go the opposite way, so exuberant, everything's going to be perfect, everything's going to be fine, everything's because they can't bear to face it gets them through life. The problem is that there's going to be a storm that comes up that you can't ride that worldview out of. It's going to be too much. Opposed to that, you have joy. Living your life every day and every moment in view of God's grace to you. And you've got to put that to the test. You've got to take that out into the storm. You've got to see whether that can get you through. You've got to see whether or not God is faithful to that. You have to test it out. How else are you going to have confidence in it? How else are you going to adopt it and start to learn it and start to use it? You're not just, the problem is people don't understand. We come to our worldview, we come to our view of life and our disposition, we come to that out of survival. But in the end, it doesn't help us to survive. It does the opposite of that. It actually makes certain that we will falter. Heaven is going to be heaven. Joy has to be solid and robust. And what God is saying is put this to the test. Live each moment in light of my grace and see what happens to your life. Well, the end of that passage that we read talks about being complete and perfect. The ability to live in recognition of grace in all circumstances and having that grace, that joy that comes from recognizing grace, be solid, be complete, being able to have nothing else added to it because it is perfect. So let's talk thirdly about how do I complete joy? How do I live? How do I perfect it? How do I make it all it can be? Now, it's interesting. There's a passage in Luke chapter 15. Now, you might remember Luke chapter 15 is that chapter about lost things. There's the lost coin, there's the lost son, there's all that, the lost stuff. And in Luke 15, chapter 4, Jesus is talking about a lost sheep, and he says, "What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he has lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing." Now, here's the thing. That verse is very strange to me, but it was only strange to me this week because I noticed a detail in it that I hadn't noticed before. After laying it on his shoulders and going off, it talks about he takes it back and there's a rejoicing and stuff like that. But here's the thing that that I noticed, that I hadn't noticed before, that is very odd to me, and that is that it's not like me at all. Okay, imagine being a shepherd. Imagine you have these 99 sheep. You have 100 sheep, but when you get back, you count it all up and you realize there's only 99, so you count again. So now you've probably counted them 4 times. And you know that there's one gone, and you probably even know the one that's gone, because the one that's gone is the one that's always gone. You know how it works, right? And you think, I should have checked before I left the pasture. What was I thinking? And then you get on to yourself about why you're so dumb. And then you go trudge back out into the night. You have somebody else watch your sheep. You trudge back out into the night and you go look for this sheep. Now, what I'm saying here is if you're me, there is going to be rejoicing. There is going to be rejoicing, but it's the rejoicing of when it's all over and done with, and you're back at home and you're sitting down and it's all in the past. When it's all in the past, there's going to be rejoicing. But notice something interesting about this text. That's not what it says. This is where it loses me. And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders rejoicing. Now it's only halfway done. Rescuing the sheep is only halfway done. He's found it. Now he's got to carry that dumb sheep all the way back to where it belongs. That's the worst part of it, right? That's the worst part of it. So he goes through the worst part of it rejoicing. See, that's where it loses me. Now, here's the thing. It totally makes sense because the parable is not about me. The parable is about Jesus. But it says something really important, doesn't it? It says that Jesus actually rejoices to save you. Jesus is actually joyful. He experiences joy to save you. He wants to save you. He loves to save you. He enjoys saving you. You see, in my mind, if you have to be rescued, if this is true, like I see those people on TV who like decide to cross a road when it's flooded and they get stuck. And I'm like, what a dope, right? How many are, anybody else here? What do you want to? Okay, I see some head. Nobody wants to raise their hand, but I see some heads shaking, so good. Not alone. Now, here's the thing. I'm like, and I would be so embarrassed, wouldn't you be? Like if the helicopter had to come and drop the rope to you, and there's like 500 people on the side, and they've got all these spotlights, and the news cameras there and everything, and they're like, here's the dope, right? And I would be so embarrassed, and then they drop the line to you, and you hold on to it, and they take you. I'd be all sheepish. I'd be like, sorry, really sorry. I know I shouldn't have done it. I don't know what I was thinking. I've seen this. I've seen other dopes do this. I don't know why I did it. I'm the dope today. That's what I would be. And in fact, every time I need to be rescued from anything, that's how I am. But that's not what's going on here. Jesus is actually joyful to save you. And it's all our fault. That's the thing. It's not like we just wandered, we fell off a cliff or something. Like sin was right there. And the Bible's telling us, sin right here, sin, sin, sin. Don't go here, don't go here, don't go here. And we go, okay. And we walk right into it. And so it's all our fault. And that's the thing that's crazy to me, is it's hard for me to picture. It's really hard for me to picture the love of Christ for me. That in all of that, it's all my fault. I know better and I do it anyway. It's all my fault. And yet he joyfully comes and picks me up and puts me on his shoulders and walks with me. Joyfully he saves me. Joyfully he does. In fact, the Bible talks about how people rejoice in heaven over one person that's lost. There's rejoicing. There's going to be soon a party in heaven. See, that's the thing that I have a hard time with. I have a hard time understanding how that could be the case. And in fact, in Luke chapter 15, verse 9, there's this other great passage. It talks about a woman who's lost this coin, and she searches her house. And when she has found it, it says, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost. You see, I think our joy can be complete when we know the grace of God. I think it becomes more perfect when we understand that God is joyful to give us and extend to us that grace. But I think it really isn't complete until we join with God in that joy over extending grace. You see, what's happening with this woman's neighbors is their neighbors are coming. They haven't found a coin, but they're coming with her, and they're so excited for her that they're experiencing her joy. That's complete joy, when you get to share in the joy of other people. And what could be better than sharing in the joy of God Himself over rescuing a lost sheep, over experiencing the joy of experiencing along with the person who's being saved, the joy of that salvation. And being able to be used by God and in joyfully trying to bring people. You see, there's a whole nother aspect of joy we're missing out on if we don't get to the point where the lost and the joy of saving the lost is part of our joy. Well, how do we apply this? Well, really quickly, I think we need to believe that Christ has joy in our salvation. I think that's a hard thing to believe. It's one thing to believe that He kind of, okay, I'll save you, but it's another thing to believe that He has joy over our salvation, that He enjoys it. Secondly, we need to belong to Jesus and to the rejoicing of the saints. We need to really belong to Him, have our heart in Him, and in the rejoicing of the saints, and then finally become by having His spirit of joy in saving other people. And the great thing is we have an opportunity to do that right now, because somebody's about to be saved.
Thanks for joining our worship service today. Please follow us on our Facebook page, where you can let us know about any needs or prayer requests you may have and keep up with the latest church news and events. You can also check out all of our past lessons and other videos by visiting our YouTube channel. At First Christian Church, we strive to be the presence of Christ in the world by helping others to believe in God's love for them, to belong to His church, and to become like Christ in their lives. If you would like to support us in our ministry, you may do so by giving online through our website at www.fcct.org or by mailing checks to the church. Have a great week.